The story begins in 1945, shortly after the end of World War II. Grace Stewart, a devout Catholic woman, lives with her two young children and Nicholas in a large, isolated manor on the Channel Islands. Her husband, Charles, went off to fight in the war and has not returned. The house stands alone in the mist, disconnected from the outside world. There is no electricity, no telephone, and Grace keeps the household running by following a strict set of rules. One morning, Grace awakens from a nightmare and prepares for the day. She is stern and formal, obsessed with silence and order. When she hears a knock at the front door, she finds three strangers waiting: an older woman named Mrs. Mills, an elderly gardener named Mr. Tuttle, and a young mute girl named Lydia. They claim to be looking for work. Grace, assuming they're responding to a newspaper advertisement she had written, invites them inside without hesitation. As she gives the trio a tour of the house, Grace explains her house rules. First, no door must be opened without closing the previous one. Second, the house must remain quiet at all times. Grace suffers from migraines and prizes silence. Third, and most importantly, all curtains must remain closed. She explains that her children suffer from a rare condition, photosensitivity. Exposure to sunlight causes their skin to break out in painful sores, possibly even blisters. She leads the new servants through various rooms, locking the doors behind them. The house has been without servants for 2 weeks, ever since the previous staff disappeared suddenly, without collecting their wages. Grace is relieved to have new help and instructs the trio to begin their work immediately. Later, Grace brings the servants into the children's quarters. Before the children enter the room, she reminds the staff to close all curtains. The children and the elder daughter and Nicholas, her younger brother, are introduced. Mrs. Mills prepares their breakfast, and during the meal, and questions whether these new servants will also leave like the others. She casually mentions that their mother went mad, which is why the previous staff left. Nicholas is disturbed by her words and begs her to stop talking. Grace overhears part of the conversation and later pulls Mrs. Mills aside. She tells her not to believe everything the children say. She also learns something troubling. The advertisement she sent to the newspaper had never been collected. This means it was never published. Suspicious, Grace questions Mrs. Mills about how they knew there was a job opening. Mrs. Mills explains that she, Mr. Tuttle, and Lydia had worked in the house many years ago when it belonged to another family. They returned on a whim, hoping to find work again. She says a house of this size always needs staff. Grace remains wary, but accepts the explanation and allows them to stay. Later in the day, Grace conducts a religious lesson with the children. They read from the Bible, and Grace warns them that good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell. She tells them to study in separate rooms to avoid distractions. As the children go off to study, Grace settles in the living room, enjoying the quiet. Suddenly, she hears the sound of a child crying. She rushes to check on Nicholas, but finds him relaxed and unbothered. She then checks on Anne, who insists she wasn't crying either, and explains that it was another boy named Victor, a strange child she says has been living in the house. According to Anne, Victor was upset and crying because he doesn't like the house. He told her that she and Nicholas should leave. Grace is disturbed by Anne's story and tells her to stop making things up. She demands to know how anyone could enter the house without being noticed, especially when the doors were all locked. But when she checks the hallway, she finds a door open, one she knows was shut. She immediately confronts the servants, accusing them of leaving the door open. They deny it. They say they were outside the entire time and had not been in the house. Grace remains unconvinced that night and wakes Nicholas and tells him the curtain is open. Nicholas is frightened. Exposure to light could hurt him and insists she didn't open it and claims it was Victor again. She then appears to speak with someone who isn't visible. Nicholas becomes terrified as Anne asks the unseen boy to touch her brother's face to prove he's real. Nicholas screams. Grace bursts into the room. Nicholas says and is trying to scare him again. Grace punishes and by making her stand in the hallway and read from the Bible and refuses to apologize, saying she didn't do anything wrong. 3 days later, she still hasn't apologized. One afternoon, Grace is sitting downstairs doing embroidery when she hears footsteps and loud noises from above. She yells at Lydia to stop making noise, but when she looks out the window, she sees all servants are outside. Alarmed, Grace heads upstairs and tells her the intruders, Victor's family, are inside the junk room. Grace enters the room cautiously. She hears faint whispers and voices. She begins pulling off the dust covers on furniture, trying to find the source. But the room appears empty. Suddenly, the door swings open. She rushes out but finds no one in the hallway. Later, and shows her mother a drawing. In it are 5 figures, a man, a woman, a boy named Victor, and a strange old woman, and says the old woman keeps asking her to go somewhere with her. Grace becomes visibly distressed, convinced that intruders may truly be in the house. Grace arms herself with a rifle. She orders the servants to open every curtain and helps search the entire building. The family moves from room to room. They find nothing. But in the junk room, Grace comes across an old album filled with photographs of dead people. She asks Mrs. Mills about it. Mrs. Mills calmly explains that these are post-mortem photographs. In the past, families took portraits of their deceased, loved ones to remember them. Grace finds it disturbing and asks her to remove the album from the house. That night, Grace finds herself emotionally drained. She sits beside her children while they sleep. She holds and gently and apologizes for being too harsh. Nicholas, still awake, quietly asks when their father will return. Grace cannot answer. Suddenly, they hear music. The piano is playing in the empty music room. Grace grabs her keys and checks it. She finds a room empty and the piano lid open. She closes the lid, locks it, and leaves, but the moment she steps out, the door slams behind her. When she reopens it, the piano lid is open again. Panicked, she summons Mrs. Mills. She asks her how such things are possible. Mrs. Mills tells her something unsettling. Sometimes the world of the dead becomes mixed up with the world of the living. Disturbed by these words, Grace decides to take action. She will leave the property to find a priest and have the house blessed. Before leaving, she instructs Mr. Tuttle to search the grounds for old gravestones. As she walks into the fog-covered woods, Mr. Tuttle looks at Mrs. Mills and asks if it's safe to let her go. Mrs. Mills replies, "The fog won't let her go far." She then tells him to hide the gravestone completely. The fog thickens as Grace pushes forward. She becomes disoriented and confused. Just when she begins to panic, she sees a figure emerging from the mist. It is Charles, her long-lost husband. Grace stands frozen in the thick fog, staring at the figure emerging through the mist. It's Charles, her husband, whom she believed had died during the war. Shocked and overwhelmed, she rushes into his arms. Charles doesn't speak much. He looks dazed, confused, and emotionally distant. But Grace is simply relieved to see him again and leads him back to the house. The servants seem surprised at Charles's arrival, but don't question it. Once home, Charles greets Anne and Nicholas. He embraces them gently, but says little. Grace puts him to bed and tells the children their father needs rest. Over the next day, Charles remains mostly silent. He spends nearly all of his time in bed, staring blankly or lying still. Grace is troubled by his behavior, but she avoids confronting it. She sits beside him, speaking softly, hoping he will return to his old self. Meanwhile, and continues talking about Victor and the others. She insists that ghosts are in the house. Grace, trying to preserve the peace with Charles home again, returns to denying these stories. She scolds and once more for encouraging Nicholas to believe in things that aren't real, and becomes upset and runs away from the table. Mrs. Mills comforts her and quietly tells her that she believes the stories. She says she has seen the same intruders and described. Then she adds something mysterious. That changes are coming, big ones. Back upstairs, Grace begins preparing and for a religious ceremony. She dresses her in a white veil she's been sewing, resembling a communion outfit, and admires the dress and asks if she can keep the veil on long. Grace leaves her alone for a moment. When she returns, Grace sees a figure sitting on the floor with the veil still on. But something is wrong. The hands are wrinkled, and the face under the veil looks like that of an old woman. Terrified, Grace grabs the figure and begins shaking her violently. Suddenly, the veil slips off. To her horror, she sees that it's Anne. In her fear, Grace had mistaken her own daughter for something else and runs away in tears. Mrs. Mills arrives quickly and takes Anne aside, comforting her as she cries. Grace is shaken and unable to explain what just happened. Later, Mrs. Mills gives Grace a glass of water with her usual migraine pills. But after Mills leaves the room, Grace does not take them. Instead, she quietly empties the pills into the sink. That evening, Charles finally speaks. He confronts Grace about the incident that happened before he returned, the day she lost control. He refers to it vaguely, but it's clear he knows something happened involving the children. Grace denies hurting them. She insists she would never do such a thing, but Charles remains distant. His voice is calm, but cold. He then tells Grace he must go back to the front. She reminds him that the war is over. He says nothing in response. She begs him to stay, but Charles gently kisses her and walks away. The next morning, Grace wakes to find his side of the bed empty. Charles is gone again. She hurries outside, scanning the path, hoping to see him through the fog. But the woods are empty. Back inside the house, and Nicholas wake to find that all the curtains have been removed. Sunlight fills the room and screams. Grace hears the noise and rushes upstairs. She quickly shields them with a coat and hurries them into one of the few remaining dark rooms. Confused and frightened, Grace demands to know who removed the curtains. She confronts the servants, but they appear calm. Mrs. Mills suggests that maybe the children have grown out of their sensitivity to light. Grace, disturbed by their casual attitude, becomes angry and suspicious. She goes to the gun cabinet, retrieves the rifle, and forces the 3 servants to give her the keys to the locked rooms. She fires them on the spot, shouting that she won't let them harm her children. The 3 walk out of the house without resistance. Outside, Mrs. Mills turns to Mr. Tuttle and Lydia. She tells them that the time has come. They must uncover the graves. Meanwhile, Grace is determined to find the missing curtains. She searches the house room by room, opening trunks and closets, ripping through furniture and fabrics. But she finds nothing. Every curtain in the house is gone. That night, and Nicholas sit in their room, whispering, and tells Nicholas that she thinks their mother is going mad again, like she did before. Nicholas doesn't want to believe, but in a certain something is wrong. She tells her brother she's going to look for their father. Nicholas, frightened to be left alone, says he'll come too. The 2 children sneak out of the house into the darkness. As they walk through the grounds, they stumble upon something half buried under the leaves. It's a group of gravestones. They wipe away the dirt and begin reading the names. To their shock, they see that the gravestones belong to Mrs. Mills, Mr. Tuttle, and Lydia. At the same moment, Grace, still inside the house, searches the servants' quarters. She opens a drawer and finds something strange. An old photo from the post-mortem album. It shows Mrs. Mills, Tuttle, and Lydia lying still with eyes closed, dead. Now terrified, Grace hears footsteps. She turns around just as the servants appear. Outside, and Nicholas look up and see the same 3 figures walking slowly toward them. The children scream and run back toward the house. Grace meets them at the front steps. She grabs the rifle and points it at the 3 servants. She pulls the trigger. Nothing happens. The gun has no effect. Mrs. Mills calmly tells her they don't want to harm her. They're not there to hurt anyone. Grace retreats into the house and locks the door. She tells her children to go upstairs and hide. She is frantic now, shouting that the dead must leave them alone. From outside, Mrs. Mills speaks gently to Grace. She explains that they have lived in the house for many years. She tells her they died long ago, more than 50 years ago, from tuberculosis. She says they, too, did not realize they were dead at first. Lydia went mute when she finally understood the truth. Mills then says something ominous. Even if the 3 of them leave, others will still come. Others who live, and who will one day sense the presence of Grace and her children. Meanwhile, upstairs, and Nicholas hide in a wardrobe. They hear a creaking sound. Slowly, the door opens. The old woman and Drew in her picture is standing in front of it. The wardrobe doors creak open, and Nicholas stare in terror as the old woman leans forward. She calmly addresses and asking what happened in the house. Nicholas whispers for and not to speak, not to tell her anything. But the old woman continues questioning. Downstairs, Mrs. Mills tells Grace that the intruders, the people she's been hearing and seeing, have found the children. Grace, still holding the rifle, is panicked and confused. Mills gently tells her that she must go to them. She must talk to the people who are now in the house. Reluctantly, Grace walks up the stairs and enters the room where her children are hiding. Inside, she sees the old woman seated at a table, surrounded by others. The room is arranged for a seance. The old woman acts as a medium. Sitting with her are Victor's mother and father and 2 men, one taking notes, the other watching intent. The old woman asks and again what her mother did, and hesitates. Then she quietly mentions something about a pillow. Grace's eyes widen. The old woman gently presses on, asking why they remain in the house if they are dead. Grace steps forward. Her voice rises in denial. She yells that they are not dead. She begins to throw objects around the room, causing books and papers to fly. The people at the seance see the items move on their own. Papers rip, chairs creak, and the medium's eyes widen. The mother clutches Victor protectively as chaos erupts around the table. Victor's family and the others at the seance now understand. They are not alone in the house. They have been living among ghosts Grace and Nicholas are the ones haunting the home. Grace suddenly stops. Her energy spent, she begins to cry. The strangers at the table quickly end the seance. Victor's mother insists they must leave the house at once. She says her son has been waking up screaming, speaking of ghosts and a girl named Anne. She can't stay any longer. Her husband agrees. He tells her they'll leave in the morning. The medium says nothing, quietly packing up her notes and supplies. The seance is over. Back inside the room, Grace sits with Anne and Nicholas. The realization has sunk in. She remembers everything now. Her voice trembles as she explains what happened. On that terrible day, overcome by grief over Charles's disappearance and unable to bear the isolation any longer, Grace broke down. She smothered Anne and Nicholas with a pillow while they slept. Then, horrified by what she had done, she took the rifle and turned it on herself. She thought she had failed when nothing happened. But then she heard her children laughing, alive and well. She believed it was a miracle, that God had given them another chance. But it wasn't a miracle. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something else entirely. They had all died that day. Everything since then, the days of silence, the fog, the missing servants, was the aftermath. Grace sobs. Her children, now understanding the truth, cry with her. The three of them embrace. There is no more denial. There are no more lies. They are dead. A moment later, Mrs. Mills steps quietly into the room. She doesn't need to speak. Her calm expression says everything. She sits beside them and speaks gently. She tells Grace that others will come. People will move into the house. Some will notice them, others will not. But this is their home now, and they must learn to share it. Grace listens, exhausted. She no longer fights it. For the first time, she is at peace with the truth. She looks at her children. They are safe. They are with her. The next morning, sunlight pours through the windows. And in Nicholas, once terrified of light, stand calmly in its warmth. They are no longer harmed. Their bodies are gone. The illness that once kept them in the dark no longer binds. Outside, Victor's family loads their belongings into a car. The real estate sign stands posted in front of the house. They are leaving. Another family may come soon. From the upper windows, Grace and Nicholas watch silently. The house is theirs, not as owners, but as memories, as spirits tied to its walls. In a quiet, measured voice, Grace says they will never leave this place. This is their home. That's how the story ends.